market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. In just a moment, we discuss the latest from the White House on the Iran war with our Deputy Washington Bureau Chief. We're also joined by Wei Li, Global Chief Investment Strategist at BlackRock. But let's begin with big tech and AI. Now, Intel shares are soaring on a blockbuster sales forecast that shattered Wall Street expectations. Intel, pre-market, gaining more than 21%. We're now joined by Matt Bloxham, our senior analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Matt, this was a bit of a surprise. I mean, Intel is absolutely booming. What have we learned from their earnings?
We're learning that the AI technology
is alive and well.
but it's transitioning into the next phase, which is away from training, which is heavily reliant on NVIDIA chips, into inferencing. Like, companies are starting to use technology, and to do that, they need a different kind of technology to complement it, which is back to the old school CPUs, the kind of the once dominant domain for Intel. And so they're seeing huge demand for their Xenon processors, which can kind of carry out that inferencing. So yeah, it's kind of back to the old school vibe, really.
So S&P and Intel doing great, but then you also have Microsoft and Meta going through quite big job cuts.
Yeah, so 23,000 jobs across those two companies, 8,000 losses at Meta and another 6,000 posts that won't be refilled, and another kind of 9,000 or so at Microsoft. I think some of this is a bit of legacy hangover from overhiring through the pandemic period, but obviously they are both spending big sums of money on AI, and they need to demonstrate to investors that they're being responsible about managing their cost base. So I think there's some of that coming into play. I mean, for context, there's some rough numbers. $2 billion maybe of headcount costs will come out of Meta on the back of this, against a total cost base of $120 billion. So it's relatively small, but I think it's an important signal that they're kind of thinking about their cost base and trying to manage these additional investments they're making in AI.
Okay, Matt, thanks so much. Matt Bloxham there, our Bloomberg Intelligence senior analyst. Now, Bloomberg also understands that President Trump's threats and social media posts are hindering the process of further U.S.-Iran peace talks. Now, we're told that Trump's Truth Social posts, as well as his decision to continue with the naval blockade of Iranian ports, have hampered mediation efforts through Pakistan. Now, we're joined by Laura Davison, Bloomberg's Washington Deputy Bureau Chief. So, Laura, how has this behavior basically been impacting progress?
Essentially, the Iranians aren't liking it. Trump's strategy of going out with big, bold, maximalist threats, changing demands almost day by day, throwing out these deadlines, then backing off of them, have indicated to them that he's not negotiating in good faith, and that he's not a partner that he can trust. And they've essentially said, look, we're not going to negotiate while under these threats. This is also coupled with the blockade, the naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz that Trump has also implemented in recent weeks, that have just sort of furthered hardened their positions here, that that Trump is looking for a military buildup versus looking for some sort of ceasefire or way to back down. And this just really shows that there's a very much a different negotiating tactic that may work in sort of the New York real estate scene that Trump has been able to use effectively in business and with other world leaders, but translating this to a really high stakes war conflict in the Middle East, both inside and outside the White House, there's worry that Trump is actually worsening the situation and prolonging the war.
So, Laura, President Trump says that Israel and Lebanon will extend their ceasefire. So what more do we know about that?
Yeah, so this was a ceasefire that was reached a couple weeks ago, and he extending it for 3 more weeks. This is, while not directly central to the U.S.-Iran conflict, it is a part of this because it's there's been essentially a proxy war going on between Israel and Hezbollah, which is an Iran-backed group that operates within Lebanon for some time. And this is part of what, Iran wants to also see the fighting there stop there and have the attacks from Israel stop. So having this ceasefire, a 3-week ceasefire, is a positive sign that potentially the U.S. talks could get back on track. Without that, it's one piece of the puzzle, but it's a relatively small piece of sort of the overall problems that the U.S. and Iran still face that they need to work out, including, what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz, the future of Iran's nuclear program, its ballistic missile program, and what life looks like in Iran going forward.
Laura, thanks so much for the update. As always, Laura Davison, Bloomberg's Washington Deputy Bureau Chief. Now, joining us now is Wei Li, Global Chief Investment Strategist at BlackRock. Wei, thank you for joining us. When you look at, what we've talked about in the past, you always say AI is a megaforce. So we'll talk about energy and U.S. and Iran in a second. But has anything changed? I mean, it does seem to just accelerate every time.
In terms of AI, I think we have seen two developments. The first is that if you look at the revenue ramp for model developers, we're seeing unprecedented speed on that front. And then the second development is that the capacity is becoming more constrained. The constraint has become really much worse compared to before. You look at GPU, you talked about CPU, and data centers, they're really becoming quite profitable. Even old chips are becoming quite valuable to lend out, as Matt was just saying just now. So because of this, I think this is the most clear evidence we need to see to show that this significant capex spend so far has not been misallocated. And against that backdrop, more capex is good, not bad. And we have seen more capex so far this year, 60% higher compared to commitment and what realized last year, which was already record.
Is that a concern? So the higher capex, is it because chips are getting more expensive? We also had a story yesterday about ASML or the infrastructure, or is it inflationary?
Well, I think in part it reflects the higher prices. In part, it reflects greater conviction in the AI transformation. And the last thing I would say is that there has been some development on the technological front in terms of energy generation, power generation that allowed companies to up their capex spend, right? So, for example, this idea of behind-the-meter power generation that doesn't require grid connection, and energy was one binding constraint. So as we see that improving on the margin, we see companies feeling a bit more comfortable with guiding up capex, and valuation has become cheaper compared to before. Tech has fallen back in line in terms of valuation versus broader market. Earnings are strong, so we're overweight.
Overweight in all parts of AI. Again, there are questions. You know, we have the new model by DeepSeek. There's this big race between LLM models. Is that too dangerous? I mean, does it really make a difference who comes on top?
It does over time, and I would say right now we're specifically overweight semis and hardwares, because when it comes to the application layer, so right now we're in the build-out phase, but when it comes to the application phase, I think the jury is still out. Who is going to win? Is it the ultimate kind of model provider and compute provider, or is it going to be the provider of data, IP, and patents, right? So I think on that front, jury is still out, but the enormous amount of power and commitment that we have seen so far already keeps us overweight broadly on AI and U.S. equities.
Wait, I mean, U.S. equities, despite the volatility in the price of oil and the fact that we don't really know where this conflict is going?
Well, that's actually really remarkable, because if we do a mark-to-market versus pre-war, oil prices like 50% higher, net gas prices significantly higher, especially in Europe and APAC, and rates are quite a bit higher, front-end and back-end, right, to the tune of 40 basis points in U.S. and also in Europe, and yet risk assets are holding up really well. U.S. equities up mid-single digits because of the perceived and also actual energy independent spreads have been holding up really well throughout the whole of this conflict. That really makes the current market backdrop feel a bit easy and make our overweight risk position feel a bit uneasy because the strait remaining closed is a big risk. Having said that, we have seen very clear evidence of economic incentives to resolve the conflict, right? Because all parties have really fallen short of major kind of escalation every single time. And in terms of the accrued macro damage, we're talking about up until now to the tune of 0.2, 0.3% to global GDP, more heavily concentrated in Europe and APAC, less so in the US, which is why even before we have clarity in terms of kind of the resolution of the war, we were able to dial up risk 2 weeks ago by upgrading U.S. and emerging market equities. The last thing I would say is that markets can only focus on one thing at a time, and right now it's earnings, and earnings are good.
Yeah, earnings are good, but is there a concern that actually they slowly deteriorate in ways that we're not quite figuring out? I mean, again, inflation's a big question mark.
It's possible because the nature of broad supply disruption is stagflationary, right? So it will impact
nightmare
earnings.
For everyone.
Yes, for central bankers, for investors. And if this persists for a lot longer, it's possible that it could impact earnings, both from a demand consumer perspective and also from a cost of production margin pressure perspective. We're not there yet, and because of the recognition that economic incentives are seemingly influencing decisions, we're leaning into the momentum right now.
Wait, we're just getting some breaking news. So this is a Bloomberg headline saying that China has added 7 EU firms to export control lists over links with Taiwan. Again, we haven't really talked about the U.S. versus China for quite some while because there's so much else going on. But is this a risk that could come back on in full force?
While there are themes that are getting accelerated by the Middle East war, no matter what happens from here in terms of the next kind of headlines that can come from anyone and anywhere. And these themes include geopolitical fragmentation, it includes energy security independence, it includes infrastructure and supply chain independence. And we are in this world shaped by supply. And in the face of more demand than supply, you can see headline like this. It's not entirely surprising.
Wait, what do central banks do? I mean, there's a lot of... I don't know if that concern has been walked back, but that they actually act too quickly. Also, remember in 2022 when they acted too slowly.
Yeah, they were behind the curve back then. I think it's becoming so hard for them because inflationary pressure, even before the Middle East war, was already, not very comfortable, right? Goods prices are starting to come back and service prices have been persistent because of the wage pressure. And on top of that, you throw in Middle East conflict that is not just energy, it's broad-based supply chain shock. And then on top of that, AI is actually inflationary first before it can be disinflationary. Look at what it is doing to energy prices, electricity, and labor cost. When you bring all of this together, already it was a very fine balance that central bank had to really strike the balance of. And now I think markets have swung wildly in terms of rate repricing. And if headlines resolve, we can see the pricing kind of coming back in terms of rate hikes. But I don't think we're going back to the previous environment where multiple cards were on the table, because we're just talking about, already pressure is there and incrementally more so.
What did you make of the Kevin Warsh testimony? I mean, it's only one vote, but actually he could really be divisive if he does push for interest rate cuts too soon. Yeah,
he is only one vote, and I think we are going to, what we have already seen in terms of the disagreement and divergence on the committee. I think that is really a feature of this environment where the trade-off facing central bank is becoming so much harder, and you throw him into the mix is just kind of a ramification of the environment that we're in.
So I love the way, you're overweight U.S. EM stocks, you see AI megaforce accelerating. Is there something where you see a big dislocation that actually is a good time to sell? I don't know how much you worry about private credit or anything, like that's still bubbling in the background.
I would say where we have underweight is specifically long duration government bonds and also long duration credit, but we like front end for income and quality income, because if we look at, for example, U.S. Government bond market term premium, 10-year is currently around 66 basis points. Given where we are heading towards in terms of fiscal, where we're heading towards in terms of the inflationary pressure, and also the fact that treasuries haven't been very effective as a diversifier this time round. So investors are going to think twice about its balanced property in portfolio. You bring all of this together, I think over the longer term premium in U.S. treasuries can go up to 150 basis points. We're currently only at 66 basis points. So there is room for that to push higher, and that's what we're using to fund the risk-on convictions.
So interesting. Wei, as always, thank you for joining us. Wei Li, the Global Chief Investment Strategist at BlackRock. Now, coming up, the German economy, of course, is in focus. We'll be speaking to the IFO Institute president with the latest data on the nation's business confidence. Clemens Fuest up next, and this is Bloomberg. The The aviation industry is facing a monumental challenge to keep up with the surge costs of jet fuel on the back of the Iran war. Now, American Airlines has cut its full-year outlook, while Lufthansa is rolling out a stripped-down fare with just a small carry-on included. Well, we're now joined by Bloomberg Managing Editor for Aviation, Benny Camel. Benny, how drastic is the supply crunch on jet fuel, really?
Well, the supply crunch doesn't seem to be so bad right now, but what really is the issue is the cost of jet fuel. So we've heard from a number of airlines this week that reported earnings, all saying that really the cost of the jet fuel is what's causing lots of headache. American Airlines, for instance, they reported this week, they said that they expect $4 billion in additional jet fuel-related costs by the end of the year. And that is a huge number that they somehow need to pass on, and they are passing it on, in essence, to the consumer. We know that the US government would like airlines to sort of keep those costs in-house, but they simply can't, particularly those that are somewhat weaker. And as a result, you are seeing ticket prices go up. We heard from United Airlines saying that by the end of the year, they plan to hand off the entirety of the additional costs in terms of ticket prices. So expect those prices to go up. And maybe over time, if that's not enough, some of the weaker airlines will need to start thinking about, do we need to shed assets? Do we need to look for a stronger partner? So again, we heard some of that going on this week. So there's certainly movement in the industry. For the time being, a lot of it is around the ticket prices.
Benny, what actions are airlines actually taking to grapple with the surging price?
So they can do several things. As I just said, they can pass on the ticket prices, but that only goes so far. That suggests that the demand is still there, but at some point that will also break. You can't load up the consumer with endless ticket price increases. So once people come out of the end of the summer and we look into sort of the shoulder season of travel, it'll be harder still to get these ticket prices higher. So what can you do? You can start cutting costs. You can think about what do you need, what don't you need? Do you need to furlough employees? Do you need to think about your fleet? What kind of aircraft do you have that might be too fuel guzzling? And then the ultimate logic will be to really look for a stronger partner. We have reported that United Airlines sort of took a cursory look at American. We know that American is speaking to Alaska to deepen their collaboration. Mm-hmm. We know in the US that Spirit Airlines, which are bankrupt and are trying to avoid liquidation, they are now hoping for a bailout essentially from the US government. Again, a fairly drastic step, but those are the sort of multiple measures that are taking place in the industry right now, and it shows that this is really a crisis that's not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, Benny, thank you so much for the terrific update. As always, Bloomberg Managing Editor for Transport and Aviation, Benedict Camel. Now, Germany's business outlook has deteriorated more than expected, adding to fears that higher energy costs will derail the country's economic revival. The IFO Expectations Index dropped to its lowest level since summer 2023, where I'm delighted to be joined by Clemens, president of the IFO Institute. Mr. Fuest, thank you for joining us. Is it now more likely that we actually have a recession scenario, or could we have a reversal with growth picking up?
Well, the expectation before the war was something like 1% growth for the German economy. Most forecasts have now downgraded this to 0.5. I would say there certainly is a risk that we are going towards stagnation. I wouldn't talk about a recession yet, but all of that depends on the further course of the conflict in the Persian Gulf, of course.
I mean, the Bundesbank sees a slight growth in the first two quarters of the year still. Do you agree?
I would say yes, we'll probably have some growth still in the first quarter. About the second quarter, I'm not sure. I mean, the economy could be even shrinking a little in the second quarter. And, the third obviously will depend on how things develop in Iran.
Yeah, Mr. Fuest, I mean, even if something happens in Iran with like a lasting ceasefire, it's unclear, especially when you look at the stock markets and the fact that they're gaining by so much, what the base case is. I mean, even if it stops tomorrow, how much is the overhang on energy prices and inflation in your mind?
That's a critical question. We know that it'll take a couple of weeks, at least maybe months, for flows of oil and gas and other products to normalize. What we see in our data today is that increasingly there are supply bottlenecks for intermediate products emerging, not just with gas and oil, but also in the chemical industry, for instance. And it will take some time for that to normalize. So if we realistically expect the conflict to last at least 1 or 2 more months, I think normalization can not be expected before the autumn.
Is there anything that the government can actually do to try and help with the crisis, I guess mitigate the crisis?
It's really hard. So one thing the government can do, the German government and other governments can do, is try and stabilize consumer demand. But of course, there is a trade-off with fighting inflation. This is a supply shock driving up inflation. And so there is a trade-off here. I think what governments should do is try and take measures to stabilize demand, but not by cutting taxes on energy. Just to make sure that there is adjustment in energy demand, but to avoid that this spills over too much to general demand for other products.
Do you worry about stagflation?
I mean, that's what we're clearly having now. It's exactly, it's a textbook case of stagflation. We see companies telling us they expect prices to rise significantly. We see rising interest rates, and we see a decline in economic activity. So it's the textbook case of stagflation. And we know that it's very hard for governments to respond to stagflation. They face unpleasant trade-offs, as do the central banks. They now face the trade-off between letting inflation happen and making the downturn worse by increasing interest rates. So it's a difficult situation to address.
But Mr. Fuest, just so I understand, stagflation, I mean, is there a point where you can still get out of stagflation? And is there a worry that once it's entrenched, it's almost impossible to fix? And where are we now?
I think we are at the beginning of a stagflationary shock. That's quite clear. So inflation is going to increase and economic activity is going to decline. Just by how much really depends on further developments in Iran. But we clearly are in a stagflationary situation at the moment.
Do you worry that a lot of governments, including the German government, just don't have a lot of fiscal leeway to move?
Well, the German government does have fiscal leeway, and they have planned to increase debt finance spending on defense, debt finance spending on infrastructure. So that is stabilizing the economy. The German economy would be shrinking already if we didn't have this stimulus. Can they increase it by very much? I doubt it, but it should have an effect this year. For other governments, especially in Europe, it's more difficult because debt is higher in most other countries, France, Italy, so there is little fiscal leeway. At the same time, fiscal expansion is not necessarily the best response to stagflation because it does drive up inflation further and may force monetary policy to increase interest rates.
Mr. Fuest, thanks so much. Clemens Fuest there.
What we can do is that.
Yeah, there's a little actually to do left. President of the IFO Institute. Coming up, we'll have plenty more, of course, on what Mr. Fuest was talking about, the Middle East and the energy crisis. This is Bloomberg. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, and these are your top stories. Bloomberg understands more peace talks between the U.S. and Iran are being hindered by public threats and social media posts from President Trump. After a challenging comeback, Intel delivers a blockbuster sales forecast that shatters Wall Street expectations. And 1 year from shocking Silicon Valley, China's DeepSeek unveils its new flagship AI model, calling it the most powerful open source platform. So as European leaders gather in Cyprus, Estonia's prime minister says there's no alternative to Ukraine's full membership to the bloc.
Our position is that we support Ukraine in the European Union because, to be honest, there's no other way. Ukraine belongs to Europe and Europe is stronger with Ukraine.
Bloomberg understands that EU leaders have signaled that preliminary conditions are in place for Ukraine to begin the first stage of the membership process, while our chief Europe correspondent Oliver Crook is on location in Nicosia. Ollie, good morning. Is Ukraine's accession process actually gaining momentum?
Yeah, absolutely, Francine. And it's really been a terrific few weeks for President Zelensky, who went to a few weeks ago having Viktor Orban still as the Prime Minister of Hungary, blocking all these initiatives towards Ukraine, including that 90 billion euro loan, which is seen as absolutely essential for the survival of the nation, both for its fiscal budgetary reasons and also for military reasons. That has all sort of gone his way in the last couple of days. In addition to that, he's also got the Europeans on board for that 20th sanction package. That has come through and will be put into place. Now there are discussions about the 21st sanction package. And Francine, really the big conversation, and this is the last thing that the Ukrainians really want, the last piece of the puzzle, is joining the European Union. And that is a conversation that is happening much more openly, that is certainly accelerating. We spoke to the Deputy Prime Minister who's in charge of negotiating that with the European Union a little bit earlier this week. He says that they think that in terms of reforms, they're about 40% of the way there, and they would like to join by next year. Now, that is optimistic on anybody's timeline, but for European leaders now, with Viktor Orban out, there's a real pathway for the Ukrainians to potentially join the European Union, and that is going to be one of the conversations that we're having here at the sidelines of the event.
Ollie, on the energy situation in Europe, what measures are being discussed to actually deal with this energy shock?
Yeah, so the EU Commission put out a few proposals and a couple of things which are really sort of seen as moving around the margins, and there's some calls here from certain European leaders to really take a more sort of a dynamic and a much more active approach by the European Union. We heard it from Giorgia Meloni last night, speaking outside of the dinner that they had last night, saying that basically the European measures do not go far enough and that they need to go further. That was echoed this morning by Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain, sort of fleshing out very specifically what Spain would like to see. They would like to see a conversation happening about loosening of fiscal rules. Francine, as you know, this is always a big debate at the European level. A lot of questions about the fiscal headspace that many of these nations have, particularly in the wake of COVID, particularly in the wake of the energy shock with Russia. How much room do they have? Can the EU budget give them a little bit more room? And also a conversation more explicitly about windfall taxes across the European Union, potentially for those energy companies that are making a lot of money, collecting some of those taxes to help fund some of these measures. So these are some of the debates. But Francine, what's really struck me here, despite some of the rhetoric we've heard about how severe this potential energy crisis is, we're really not yet in the break the glass moment, talking about really emergency measures at the EU level, things like gas price caps that we talked about in the initial wake of the invasion of Ukraine. So we'll see if that conversation accelerates. I think there's still a lot of wishful thinking here, Francine, among European leaders that this will be resolved in the next couple of weeks. Not clear, obviously, if that is going to be the case.
Yeah, Ollie, thanks so much. Ollie Crook there reporting from Nicosia. Now, Oliver will also be speaking with the Lithuanian president and Romanian president later today on the sidelines of the EU leaders meeting. Don't miss those interviews. Now, uncertainty over talks between the U.S. and Iran threaten to further delay oil flows from the Persian Gulf. Well, Bloomberg's Romano Bersecchi joins us now. Drew, with the naval blockade still in place and negotiations in Pakistan at an impasse, is the actual path to a breakthrough there?
It seems very unlikely at this point, Francine, but it is also one of those things where we won't know until we actually know. And what we do know is that the Pakistani mediators are really trying hard to get the two sides together. Just a few minutes ago, the report came through from Pakistan suggesting that they have reached out to the Iranian side once again, passing on messages from the U.S. But at this point, there doesn't seem to be a lot of hope that another round of discussions in Islamabad at least is going to happen in the coming days. And yesterday, President Trump was asked about the timeline by our own correspondent at the White House, Jeff Mason, and Trump said we're not in a rush, and also made a very, well, I would say a controversial comparison to the war in Vietnam as well, and said that went on for years. We're only about 8 weeks into this one, and said they don't want to be rushed into making a deal. Now, at the same time, the Iranian side once again are reiterating that they're not going to proceed with these negotiations until the U.S. lifts the naval blockade. Trump has said that they're not going to do a deal, and they're not going to lift the blockade until the Iranians do a deal. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. The strait is still effectively shut, and there's still a lot of mistrust between the two sides.
Is the Strait of Hormuz still largely at a standstill?
And that's the situation we're in. You've effectively got these two blockades in place. We've been monitoring various vessels that have been trying to go through. Earlier this morning, there was a VLCC that was laden with Iranian oil that was trying to make it through the Strait of Hormuz, so we're monitoring that. We know that yesterday, U.S. Central Command actually intercepted 2 Iranian vessels that were trying to make it through. They also were escorting an Iranian sanctioned vessel all the way out into the Indian Ocean, so it got all the way that far. CENTCOM say that they have managed to intercept 33 vessels in total. And at the same time, President Trump, and you just have it up there, he's saying that he has ordered the U.S. Navy to shoot and kill any boat or small boats that may be laying mines in the strait too. And in parallel to that, we know a couple of days ago that Iran and IRGC actually seized 2 vessels and fired at 2 others as well. So bottom line is, it is not safe for commercial passage. Maybe we've seen 1 or 2 vessels get through, but it is essentially a standstill. And just to point out, this morning, Goldman Sachs out with a note suggesting that Gulf crude oil production is down by 57% versus pre-war levels, down by 14.5 million barrels per day. And the longer this effective closure goes on for, the more difficult it is going to be to ramp up supply to get it back to where it was before. So this is a stalemate. And the question here is, how long is it going to go on for, and how do we break it?
Yeah, Jumana, thank you so much. Jumana Barsechi there with a terrific roundup of everything that's happening in the Middle East. Now for more analysis, Clément, Therme, non-resident fellow at the International Institute for Iranian Studies, joins us. Mr. Therme, if you look at our latest reporting, there seems to be mistrust on the Iranian side that they can really, believe the U.S. in the negotiation tactics. What does Iran want?
I think that Iran wants to find a way to guarantee a security guarantee that they will not be attacked again in a couple of weeks or for a couple of months, like it happened, between the 12 days war in June 2025 and again in February 2026. So the idea is to guarantee that the U.S. will not attack. They seek a security guarantee maybe from China. That's why the negotiation take place in Pakistan. So the Chinese factor is very important. Only China can pressure Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and also the Gulf states are putting a lot of pressure, and they're very close to Pakistan too. So I think the place of negotiation and the fact that Pakistan become an intermediary is a strong signal that it's not a face-to-face, diplomatic meeting between the U.S. and Iran, but the Gulf state will try to push, for a security council resolution to reopen the Strait of Hormuz that will be legally binding regarding international law if this happens, and we need China and Russia for that. That failed before, so that's the only way, I think.
But, what can we get in the next couple of weeks? Again, if could you get some kind of agreement on Strait of Hormuz without touching the nuclear issue? But it was the nuclear issue that got the U.S. to attack in the first place.
Yes, exactly. You need a comprehensive deal to have a long-lasting solution. But the thing is that we are going more for a short-term solution. I think there's 2 main scenarios. The first one, it's a frozen conflict. The 2 sides decide maybe to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and to end the blockade on the one hand, but Trump has to say that will no deal, or later, a roadmap maybe. And the other option is military escalation, because if the U.S. cannot obtain what they want through diplomacy, they may seek, a new military escalation. But the cost for the international economy will be very high, and we have the midterm election in November. So that's not the most probable scenario. I think the frozen conflict with some, flexibility on both sides to reopen the Strait of Hormuz in the coming weeks or months before the midterm election. And again, after the midterm election, we have a high risk of military escalation.
Do you have an understanding of how strong this Iranian regime is?
I think is weaker than it seems. That's why the Trump administration is trying to push for economic pressure and the scenario of the zombie state, a state that will not be able to pay the salary of the police, of the security forces, the Basij, the Revolutionary Guards. So that's the idea, to weaken economically the state of the Islamic Republic, not to need to have a military intervention on the ground, because this is a nightmare of the Trump administration, to send, U.S. troops troops, marines on the ground in Iran to provoke regime change. So if they can have regime change with economic pressures, they will try it. But for that, they need China, because China is a key lifetime for the Iranian regime.
Mr. Therme, I mean, is there what's China playing at right now? It's unclear. We know that they don't like disruption. We know that they don't like uncertainty. But actually, could this be to their advantage?
I think they're playing both a game, a very complicated game. On one hand, they support the Iranian state and the Islamic Republic. They provide a lifetime buying Iranian oil and providing, dual-use technology and what is needed for Iran to build this industrial defense base. But on the other hand, if they have to pay an economic price for the crisis, they may seek an agreement also with the Trump administration. There is a meeting coming mid-May between the President of China and President Trump. So that can be also a possibility for the Trump administration to seek an agreement with China. It's an easier sale than an agreement with Iran for the U.S. Congress, for internal political reasons. So the solution may be between China and the U.S. with a broader negotiation, because the U.S. have no way to pressure, beyond the blockade economically the Iranian regime.
What do you think happened? I mean, I know it's difficult, but what's your educated guess on when we have some kind of agreement, which means that the Strait of Hormuz is fully reopened? Will it ever be fully reopened until we have a comprehensive deal that could take 15, 20 months?
I think that the issue, there is a political aspect of it. Do we have a framework, to reopen it? And after you have the technical part, the military part, we have mines, you have threat of drones from Iran. So can we reopen, the Strait of Hormuz without regime change? That's the question. Can we have a diplomatic solution with the Islamic Republic that is a lasting one? Because you have also local commander of the Revolutionary Guards on the shore of the Persian Gulf that can also decide, by themselves and without listening to the central state in Tehran. So that's the issue. It's a complicated actor to deal with, the Islamic Republic. But I think in the coming months, the economic pressure will be very strong on the Islamic Republic. So they can sustain the pressure for the next 2 months, but after it will be difficult for the survival, the economic survival of the Islamic Republic.
I mean, what does the U.S. need? Again, I've often been told, look, when gasoline prices touch $5, that's when the president really needs a deal, and even if it's not a great deal, he'll accept it. On the U.S. side, are they looking at a timeline, or how desperate are they for something?
I think, yes. On the U.S. side, you have the problem of U.S. soldiers dying in the war with Iran, so the acceptability of human loss. You have the ammunition factor also. Do we have enough military equipment to choose again the military option? And the effect on the global economy is a third factor also. But on the other hand, the bad deal is also a negative outcome for President Trump because of the U.S. Congress. They will not accept a bad deal like Obama kind deal. Also, you have the issue of the frozen asset of Iran. That part of the negotiation. It's a very sensitive issue because of all the debate between Trump and Obama about really unfreezing Iranian funds. And the third element, I think, is Israel. Israel will not accept a bad deal neither.
Understood. Thank you so much for joining us, Clément, non-resident fellow at the International Institute for Iranian Studies. Now, coming up, we'll talk to Francesca Ghiretti, head of Europe-China Initiative at RAND, as Beijing navigates also the fallout from the U.S.-Iran conflict. That's next, and this is Bloomberg.
Earnings season is here.
Certainly valuations have shifted quite significantly.
Maybe a bit of optimism.
Bloomberg is first to break the numbers.
We're talking about a move away from U.S. assets.
So much corporate issuance.
Let's get the reaction and context.
With the smartest insights.
We're observing what's happening in the Middle East.
The situation is volatile.
We're closely monitoring the impacts on supply chain and logistics.
Cross-border M&A, still such a difficult thing to get done in Europe.
Continuing coverage on Bloomberg.
Well, Anthropic's Mythos AI model has been the talk of the industry in recent weeks. The company says the tool is effectively too powerful to be released to the general public. But the headlines may benefit Anthropic as it sees potential valuations approaching $800 billion. While the company is a subject of this week's Bloomberg Originals Weekly Doc.
If you look at the AI sector landscape more broadly, what you've seen is OpenAI's early dominance being challenged increasingly by Anthropic.
Anthropic is drawing investor interest at a valuation of $800 billion or higher.
Making it close to, if not the most valuable startup in the world.
Turbocharging the hype is Anthropic's latest model called Mythos.
Only a small number of companies outside of Anthropic have access to it, and on a limited basis.
This limited release has been dubbed Project Glasswing, and all the participants include a who's who of Silicon Valley.
We know that Apple, Google, Palo Alto Networks, CrowdStrike, the Linux Foundation, Amazon, they're a part of this Glasswing project. It's a highly unusual arrangement. These are fierce competitors who are trying to get the best model out there. And Anthropic is not only showing them sort of some IP that hasn't been released yet, they're allowing their competitors to potentially criticize some of the work that they did.
The unorthodox rollout has generated a lot of publicity, and already there are reports of unauthorized users accessing the model.
This is terribly basic cybersecurity practice 101 that was missed here.
We have been hearing about this theoretical threat that AI poses to cybersecurity, and what Mythos has proven is that that threat is a reality.
There are big worries that this, if it falls into the wrong hands, it could essentially lead to some of the greatest cyber risks that humanity's ever faced.
With massive potential for havoc and the stakes so high, is tech's era of move fast and break things finally over?
And you can watch the full Bloomberg Originals doc on the Bloomberg Terminal, on Bloomberg.com, and of course on YouTube. Now, DeepSeek has unveiled its new flagship AI model, claiming it is the world's most powerful open source platform. The release, a challenge to rivals OpenAI and Anthropic, comes amid intensifying scrutiny. Well, American officials and tech leaders accuse the startup of using illicit hardware and trading techniques. Well, Francesca Ghiretti, head of Europe-China Initiative at RAND, joins us now. Francesca, thank you for being with us. I wanted to actually get onto the Middle East in a second, but start with DeepSeek, because, I mean, this is a massive race, right, between the two countries. Are they like 3 months ahead, 5 months ahead, and does this continue changing?
It's the months ahead framework is very interesting because there are several pieces saying, well, I know the US is 7 months ahead. I think the framing that is really important is sort of the differences between the two of them in the sense of the US has a computing advantage, right, that we are very much aware of. And in theory, China is lagging behind in that particular sector. But the new announcements show that, you know, there's also rising very quickly to the challenge. And the big difference for the future is that the US the companies are looking at frontier models very much so, while the Chinese are thinking about how do I spread these as quickly as possible throughout the industrial production in my country, make it cheap and make it available to as many companies as possible within China.
What will be more successful? Because actually, if you make it available and cheap, it seems to me like a good strategy.
Look, it's debatable. My opinion is that for productivity, diffusion, and so industrial application is actually much more successful than frontier technology. But obviously, frontier can allow you to leapfrog and provide services that, you know, staying behind doesn't. At the same time, we've seen how quickly China has been able to catch up with some of also the closed source type of models. And so the question is perhaps the Chinese approach a better approach for productivity, industrial production, manufacturing, and so on and so forth.
Francesca, I mean, at the end of the day, is this an economic, I mean, you know, who comes out trumps in this race? Is it an economic benefit, or is it geopolitics?
It's both, as we've mentioned. So there's a geopolitical advantage. A lot of these models also have military implications, so they can create that dual-use spillover that can give advantage to one country over the other. Military-civil fusion of this sort of technologies is really important. It is, however, at the moment, the debate very key for the economic discussion, right? Both countries are going through economic struggles. It's not the best. These haven't been the best years for the economic performance in the United States or in China. So it is also mostly an economic competition.
Francesca, how's China doing overall? So we had this great story saying, look, the first special bond sale of the year of China drew strong demand. We also had a headline just moments ago saying China will allow overseas investors to trade government bond futures. So economically, China still has challenges but seems better, but they're really hurt by this energy crisis.
They are, and although the first few months, was 2 months and now 3 months of the year have shown quite solid growth in the Chinese market, we're seeing signs that these may not be as solid as we thought. The energy crisis is starting to bite. People were talking about, China is in a relatively safe position, is more resilient than other countries in the region, and that is true, is more resilient than other countries in the region. It doesn't mean is safe and is not actually paying the price of this energy crisis. And some documents that we've seen coming out of the central government show that China has a real concern when it comes to energy resilience and the cost that this brings to production, but also that foreign demand that Chinese products need in order for the economy to keep growing.
So, I mean, could they, play a bigger role in trying to temper and almost force Iran to accept a deal with the U.S., or does it also give them an advantage? Because if the U.S. thinks they can do what they want, then China could do the same with Taiwan.
I'm always very skeptical when people say, well, can China force or pressure foreign capital to do something? Yeah. China has been very active diplomatically. We've seen it that it has very deep interest, that clearly it has stakes in making sure that the Strait of Hormuz stays open. It opens up. To a certain extent, it pushed Pakistan to mediate in this conflict. It keeps calling for the strait to be open. So it is very interested. If it had wanted, or if it had the ability to pressure Tehran into striking a deal, it would have already done so to a certain extent. We always think that China is much more prone and much more interested in influencing the sorts of the different types of countries abroad. We did that back in 2022, for example, with Moscow, than China actually is. And this is sort of the difference that we need to start to understand in between how China does foreign policy and how the US has done foreign policies in the past years, right? China is an ally to a certain extent, is a partner to a lot of these countries. It doesn't mean that it's going to deploy troops to help these countries. And even though it sends help when it comes to technologies, being able to use their satellites and so on and so forth, there's a big difference between the two approaches.
Yeah, but for example, with Russia, they've continued, to support, I guess, on the sidelines.
Yes, and this may very well be the case, right? We saw that already, that the U.S. may have intercepted ships where there were precursors of missiles, and that China may have let Tehran use their satellites to target U.S. bases. So that can be the case, but from that to saying that he's able and willing to pressure foreign capital, there is a big gap.
Francesca, overall, do you see this settling down anytime soon? Because it feels like, there are these outbursts of geopolitical concerns, the Middle East really being the epicenter and being, a big one. But could you see it elsewhere in the world?
One area where I think things may stabilize is, at least at surface level, is the US-China tensions and the US-China competition. In a different geopolitical framework with a different president at the White House, all these things would have been irritants in the Beijing-Washington relationship. They would have actually led to some sort of escalation. What we're seeing is that both Xi Jinping and Donald Trump are very much committed in stabilizing the relationship, at least at surface level, and buy some time. That, however, and we need to be aware of that, doesn't mean that competition will stop, whether it is in technological race, and also there's a tension between what the president wants and what perhaps Congress wants within the United States.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for joining us. Francesca Ghiretti, Europe-China Initiative Director at RAND. Now, we'll have, of course, plenty more throughout the day. It is Friday. Happy Friday, everyone. We still have a full day of trading to get through. The focus not only on some key data a little bit later on, but, of course, on what's happening in Iran. Up next, Bloomberg Brief, and this is Bloomberg.